I just had dinner with three billionaire friends last week, and all of us agreed on one thing. America's real estate market is completely broken, and what's coming next is going to shock most people. One of them told me he's selling everything. Another one said he wouldn't buy a house in America right now if you paid him to do it. And the third one, who made his fortune in real estate, said this is the worst market he's seen in 40 years. If you own property, are thinking about buying property, or have money invested in real estate, you need to hear this. Hit that like button if you want the unfiltered truth. Drop a comment telling me if you're seeing this in your area, and subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you think about real estate forever. Here's what's happening that nobody wants to talk about. America has painted itself into a corner with real estate, and there's no good way out. We've created a situation where houses are too expensive for people to buy, but too valuable for people to sell. We've trapped an entire generation out of homeownership while simultaneously trapping existing homeowners in houses they can't afford to leave. Let me break this down for you with some numbers that will blow your mind. The median home price in America right now is over $400,000. Do you know what that means? It means that to buy a median-priced home with 20% down, you need $80,000 in cash just for the down payment, plus closing costs, plus moving expenses, plus all the other costs of buying a house. But here's the really crazy part. Even if you have $80,000 in cash, you still need to qualify for a $320,000 mortgage. At current interest rates, that's about $2,400 per month just for principal and interest. Add in taxes, insurance, and HOA fees, and you're looking at probably $3,000 per month or more. To qualify for a $3,000 per month mortgage payment, most lenders want to see monthly income of at least $10,000 to $12,000. That's $120,000 to $140,000 per year in household income. And that's just to buy a median-priced house, not some luxury mansion. Do you know what percentage of Americans make $140,000 per year? Less than 20%, which means that over 80% of Americans can't afford to buy a median-priced home in this country. 80%. We've created a housing market that 4 out of 5 people can't participate in, but it gets worse. Because of how expensive houses have become, people who do own homes are trapped. Let me explain what I mean by this. Let's say you bought a house in 2020 when interest rates were at historic lows. Maybe you got a 30-year mortgage at 3% interest. Your monthly payment is manageable. Your house has gone up in value. Everything seems great. But now you want to move. Maybe you got a new job in a different city. Maybe you need a bigger house because you had kids. Maybe you want to downsize because your kids moved out. Whatever the reason, you want to sell your house and buy a different one. Here's the problem. If you sell your house, you'll probably make a nice profit because home values have gone up so much. But when you go to buy your next house, you're going to face 3 massive problems. First, the house you want to buy has also gone up in price, probably by the same percentage as your house. So even though you made money on your sale, you're not really ahead. Second, you're going to have to get a new mortgage at current interest rates, which are probably double or triple what you were paying before. So even if you buy the exact same house for the same price, your monthly payment just doubled. Third, there's almost nothing for sale. Housing inventory is at historic lows because nobody wants to sell their house and give up their low interest rate mortgage. It's like musical chairs, except nobody wants to give up their chair because there aren't enough chairs for everyone. So what happens? People stay in houses that don't fit their needs anymore. Young families stay crammed in tiny condos because they can't afford to move up. Empty nesters stay in big houses they don't need because they can't afford to move down. The entire system is frozen. And here's where it gets really scary. This isn't just a problem for individuals, it's a problem for the entire economy. Real estate drives so much economic activity. When people buy houses, they buy furniture, appliances, do renovations, hire contractors, landscape their yards. When people move, they spend money. When people are trapped in their houses, all that economic activity disappears. But there's an even bigger problem that most people don't see coming. Commercial real estate. If you think residential real estate is messed up, wait until you see what's happening with office buildings, shopping centers, and commercial properties. Here's what's happening in commercial real estate that nobody talks about. Companies have figured out that they don't need as much office space as they used to. The pandemic accelerated the work from home trend, and now many companies are operating with 50, 60, 70% less office space than they had 5 years ago. Think about that for a second. If companies need 70% less office space, what happens to all those office buildings? What happens to the landlords who own them? What happens to the banks that lent money to buy them? What happens to the pension funds and insurance companies that invested in them? Here's what's already starting to happen. Office buildings in major cities are sitting empty. Landlords can't find tenants, so they can't pay their mortgages. Banks are starting to foreclose on commercial properties. And here's the scary part. This is just the beginning. I know people who own commercial real estate in places like San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and they're telling me horror stories. Office buildings that were worth $50 million 5 years ago are worth $20 million today, and that's if you can find a buyer at all. Some of these buildings are so worthless that owners are literally walking away from them rather than continuing to pay property taxes and maintenance costs on empty buildings. They're just handing the keys back to the bank and saying, "Here, this is your problem now. And here's why this matters to you, even if you don't own commercial real estate." Banks hold trillions of dollars in commercial real estate loans. When those loans go bad, when those properties become worthless, those banks are going to lose massive amounts of money. And when banks lose money, they stop lending money. And when banks stop lending money, the entire economy grinds to a halt. But wait, it gets worse. Remember 2008? Remember how the housing crisis almost destroyed the entire financial system? Well, we're setting up for something potentially even worse, because this time it's not just residential real estate, it's commercial real estate too. And the amounts of money involved are much, much larger. Here's another problem that nobody talks about. Local governments depend on property tax revenue to fund everything from schools to police to fire departments to road maintenance. When property values collapse, property tax revenue collapses too. And unlike the federal government, local governments can't just print money to make up the difference. So what happens? Either local governments raise taxes on the properties that are still valuable, which makes those properties less attractive and drives down their values too, or they cut services, which makes the area less desirable and drives down property values even more. It's a vicious cycle that's almost impossible to break. I'm already seeing this in some cities. Property tax bills are going through the roof in areas where property values are still high because those areas are having to subsidize the areas where property values have collapsed. It's not sustainable. Now, let me talk about something that affects everyone, not just property owners: rent. You might think that if buying houses is too expensive, people will just rent, and that will keep rental prices stable. Wrong. Dead wrong. Here's what's actually happening with rents. Because so few people can afford to buy houses, everyone who can't buy is competing for rental properties. And because homeowners are trapped in their houses and not moving, very few rental properties are becoming available. It's basic supply and demand. Huge demand. Tiny supply, skyrocketing prices. But here's the really insidious part. Landlords know that their tenants have no choice. If you can't afford to buy a house and there are no other rental properties available, you have to pay whatever the landlord asks. Landlords have all the power right now, and they're using it. I know people who are paying $3,000, $4,000, even $5,000 per month for apartments that were renting for half that amount just 5 years ago. And these aren't luxury apartments in Manhattan. These are regular apartments in regular cities. So now we have a situation where buying is unaffordable for most people, but renting is becoming unaffordable too. What happens to people who can't afford either? Where are they supposed to live? This is how you get a homelessness crisis. This is how you get people living in cars, living with multiple roommates well into their 30s and 40s, living with their parents when they should be starting their own families. We're creating a generation of people who can't afford basic shelter. And here's what really breaks my heart about this situation. Homeownership has always been the foundation of building wealth in America. For most middle-class families, their house is their biggest asset, their retirement plan, their kids' college fund, their financial security. But if an entire generation can't afford to buy houses, they can't build that wealth. They're stuck paying rent forever, which means they're building wealth for landlords instead of for themselves. The gap between the haves and the have-nots gets bigger and bigger every year. Think about it this way. If you bought a house 20 years ago, you've probably seen it go up in value dramatically. You have equity, you have an asset, you have something to leave to your kids. But if you're trying to buy your first house today, you're locked out of that wealth building opportunity. Now, here's where this gets political, and I usually try to stay out of politics, but this is too important. Politicians keep talking about solutions, but most of their solutions are making the problem worse, not better. They talk about first-time homebuyer programs that help people with down payments. Sounds good, right? Wrong. When you help more people compete for the same limited number of houses, you just drive prices up even higher. You're adding fuel to the fire. They talk about rent control to keep rents affordable. Again, sounds good, but it makes the problem worse. When you cap rents below market rates, landlords stop building new rental properties because they can't make money. Less supply means higher prices for everyone else. They talk about zoning reform to allow more housing to be built. This one actually makes sense, but good luck getting it passed. Existing homeowners don't want more houses built in their neighborhoods because more supply would drive down the value of their houses. So they vote against any politician who supports more housing development. It's a political nightmare where everyone has incentives to keep the problem exactly as it is, even though the problem is destroying the country. But here's what really scares me about this situation. It's not sustainable. Something has to give. Either prices have to come down dramatically, which would destroy the wealth of everyone who owns property, or incomes have to go up dramatically, which would cause massive inflation, or we have to build millions of new houses very quickly, which is physically impossible. There's no good solution that doesn't cause massive pain for somebody. And the longer we wait to address it, the worse the eventual reckoning is going to be. So what does this mean for you? What should you do if you're caught in this mess? Well, it depends on your situation, but let me give you some real talk about each scenario. If you currently own a home and you're thinking about selling, think very carefully before you do it. Unless you absolutely have to move, unless you have no choice, you might want to stay put. Yes, you could probably sell your house for a nice profit right now, but where are you going to live? And at what cost? Remember, if you sell your house and then rent, you're going from a fixed housing cost to a variable housing cost. Your mortgage payment stays the same for 30 years, but your rent can go up every single year. If you're on a low fixed rate mortgage, you might have the best housing deal you'll ever get in your lifetime. If you're thinking about buying your first home, I hate to say this, but you might want to wait. I know that goes against everything you've been told about real estate always being a good investment, but this market is not normal. You don't want to buy at the peak of a bubble that's about to burst. Now, I'm not saying prices are definitely going to crash tomorrow, but I am saying that at current prices and current interest rates, you're paying the highest cost for housing in American history. That's not a great time to jump in. But here's the catch-22. If you're renting while you wait for prices to come down, your rent is probably going up so fast that you might never be able to save enough for a down payment. It's a horrible situation with no good answers. If I were a young person today trying to figure out housing, here's what I would do. I would focus on increasing my income as much as possible, as fast as possible. Because in a market where everything is overpriced, the only solution is to make more money. I would work multiple jobs, start a side business, develop high-value skills, do whatever it takes to boost my earning power. And I would consider moving to a different part of the country where housing is still affordable. Yes, that might mean leaving friends and family. Yes, that might mean taking a pay cut. But if you can buy a house in Ohio or Tennessee or North Carolina for the same monthly payment as renting an apartment in California or New York, that math might make sense. Now, if you're an investor wondering whether you should put money into real estate, let me give you some perspective from someone who's made a lot of money in real estate over the years. First, stay away from commercial real estate completely. I don't care how good the deal looks. I don't care what kind of returns they're promising you. Commercial real estate is a falling knife right now, and you don't want to try to catch a falling knife. Second, be very careful about residential real estate investment properties. Yes, rents are high right now, which makes rental properties look attractive. But remember, those high rents are pricing out tenants. At some point, people can't afford to pay more rent. And when that happens, you're going to have vacant properties that you still have to make mortgage payments on. Third, if you are going to invest in real estate, focus on properties in areas where people have to live, regardless of economic conditions. I'm talking about properties near major hospitals, near major universities, near major military bases. These are recession-proof tenants who aren't going anywhere. But honestly, given everything I've told you about the real estate market, I think there are much better places to put your investment money right now. Technology companies that solve real problems, healthcare companies that serve an aging population, energy companies that are adapting to the changing world. These sectors have much better long-term prospects than real estate. Now, let me zoom out and talk about what I think happens next, because this situation can't continue forever. Something's got to give, and here are the most likely scenarios. Scenario 1, we have a controlled correction where prices come down gradually over several years. This would be the best case scenario, but I don't think it's likely because there are too many forces keeping prices artificially high. Scenario 2, we have a sudden crash where prices fall 20, 30, maybe even 40% in a short period of time. This would be triggered by some external shock, maybe a recession, maybe a banking crisis, maybe a geopolitical event. This is more likely than a controlled correction, but it would be very painful for everyone. Scenario 3, and this is the one that scares me the most, we have a lost decade where real estate prices stay high, but everything else gets more expensive too. So housing becomes affordable, not because houses get cheaper, but because incomes and inflation catch up to housing costs. This would be devastating for anyone on a fixed income or anyone who can't increase their earning power. Here's what I really think is going to happen. We're going to see different outcomes in different parts of the country. Some markets are going to crash hard, especially places where prices got way out of line with local incomes. Other markets are going to stay expensive but stable, especially places with strong job markets and limited land for development. The key for you is to understand which kind of market you're in and plan accordingly. Don't assume that what's happening in your city is the same thing that's happening everywhere else. But here's the bottom line. America's real estate problem isn't going to be solved by market forces alone. It's going to require massive changes in how we think about housing, how we zone land, how we finance homes, how we tax property. And those changes are going to take years, maybe decades to implement. In the meantime, you need to protect yourself and your family. Don't make any major real estate decisions based on fear or greed. Think long term. Be conservative. And remember that housing is supposed to be shelter first and an investment second. We've gotten so caught up in treating houses like stock market investments that we've forgotten that people actually need places to live. Until we get back to thinking about housing as a basic human need rather than a get-rich-quick scheme, this problem is only going to get worse. So here's my question for you. What are you seeing in your local real estate market? Are you trapped in a house you can't afford to leave? Are you priced out of buying? Are you paying crazy rent prices? Drop a comment and let me know what's happening in your area, because I think this is going to be the biggest economic story of the next decade. And if this video opened your eyes to how serious this problem really is, hit that like button and subscribe, because I've got a lot more economic reality checks coming your way. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better to know what's really happening than to live in denial.